Started. Welcome, everyone. My name is Peggy Lowe, and I'm the rector at St. Albans Episcopal Church in Austin, Texas, and the board president for the Episcopal Parish Network, here at the place where the church gathers. We're happy to welcome you to the second Beyond Walls Work in Progress webinar with Bexley Seabury Seminary, this time about faith, justice, and what it means to build bridges in a world of walls. We are so thankful you're here and hope you'll take advantage of the multiple learning opportunities we have here at EPN. Our biggest event, our annual conference, is a wonderful opportunity to meet your colleagues face-to-face and make new connections. We're happy to announce that the 2026 annual conference will be held in Charlotte from March 3rd through 6th. Early bird registration is open now through the end of the year, and we hope to see you there. Just a couple of procedural items before I turn everything over to our panel. First, this session is being recorded, and you will receive an email with a link to the recording and any additional materials provided by the panelists once they post to our website's webinar and library. We try to get this out within 48 hours, and please share it with friends who couldn't make it. Also, the Q&A function is disabled for all of our webinars. Please enter your questions in the chat, and the panel will answer them during and after the session as time permits. A transcript of the chat will also be available alongside the recording. Again, thank you all for being here. And now I'm happy to introduce Eileen Shanley-Roberts, Director of Formation and Contextual Learning and Assistant Professor of the Practice of Ministry at Bexley Seabury Seminary, who will start the discussion and introduce the rest of our panel. Eileen?
Thank you, Peggy. And we are so grateful to EPN for sponsoring this. Beyond Walls is a partnership of Bexley Seabury Seminary and the Episcopal Parish Network. This is our second in a series that we're calling Works in Progress. And in this case, it really is work in progress, because this is an opportunity for you to join with us as we begin some of the processing of an experience that Julie and I shared in June when we were part of a delegation that traveled to Palestine. And we have returned. We have invited John Menayer to join us. He is joining us from Jerusalem. And I am going to allow people, I'm going to give the short title introductions to people and then allow you to fill in the rest, because we all wear so many hats. But this is an opportunity for us to reflect on Palestinian liberation theology in light of our own contexts and how we might formulate a response to what we're seeing, hearing, and experiencing in the world. So Julie is the director of lifelong learning at Bexley Seabury Seminary. And our delegation this summer was her first experience in the Holy Land, which it is a really kind of special experience, and it gives a person really fresh eyes. And Julie, I wondered if you'd say a little bit more about what you do and how your experience resonates with some of the work that you've already been doing.
Thanks, Eileen. I've had the good experience in my work as distributed and lifelong learning initiatives director of having a chance to travel and be able to experience a variety of different cultures. One of the things that's been really impactful for me about our trip to Palestine was its relationship with my experience visiting indigenous communities, Native American communities across the United States during a sabbatical time. And that kind of awareness of what are our worldviews. My background and focus has always been faith formation. And I've tried to put that within the context of how digital technologies and educational practice can best help us to form and fashion people in faith. Part of what I've come to realize is how much our environments form and fashion us. It's a whole ecological system. And so by being able to visit with the Native Americans in the United States and learn about their ways of knowing and the impact of their being colonized by the culture that came from Europe and losing their culture in a land grab situation. It has a lot of parallels that I keep reflecting on with what I've learned from being in Palestine in June and being able to see the context where Palestinians and Israelis are trying to understand each other and how to live in a place that doesn't seem to have a lot of room for reconciliation and collaboration. And so I'm looking forward, John, to talking more with you about that and being able to explore some of the things that you're learning as I'm still trying to wrestle with my own space as someone who's grown up in a very privileged context with probably a lot more colonizer experience than I want to claim or admit, and being able to try to see what is the best way for me to be able to respond in supporting the communities that want to engage, to be able to support the kind of work that you and your siblings are trying to do.
Thanks, Julie. So John is joining us, as I said, from Jerusalem. He is part of a family of liberation theologians. We had the pleasure of meeting his brother Sam in June, but John is the one who was willing to stay up and join us today. He is based in Jerusalem and focuses on justice and reconciliation work and theological writing. And he and his brother have recently edited a book, The Cross and the Olive Tree, which is an amazing collection of essays, several of which speak directly to some of the questions Julie raised. John, would you like to respond?
Yeah, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me and for delving into Palestine and seeing how actually Palestine is very much connected to other contexts. And the minute we address Palestine seriously, we're actually also addressing your own context in North America too. So I'll just briefly introduce myself beyond sort of the justice and reconciliation work and the theological work that I'm involved in, but I'm a Palestinian Christian who went to an Israeli Jewish school. And the neighborhood that I live in is essentially split in half. Half of it is an Israeli Jewish area and the other half is Palestinian Muslim. So from a very young age, I was brought up in this environment where, as a Palestinian Christian, which were less than 2%, we had to engage with our Jewish and Muslim siblings in a very serious way. And not only were we engaging with our Muslim and Jewish neighbors, we were also engaging with a lot of Christians who would come from abroad on different sort of trips, who were actually telling us that we should actually leave as Palestinian Christians in order to make space for for Jews to come to this land, so the second coming of Jesus Christ would, come to pass quicker. So it's engaging with all of these different communities at the same time that really motivated myself and my siblings, my three brothers, to engage in the work of justice and reconciliation, and also in theological writings as well. So as mentioned, I had the both the privilege but also the horrible privilege, because it's a book addressing genocide, to edit that book with my brother Sam. And there's 8 other Palestinian Christian theologians in the book, 4 men, 4 women, all part of this, probably what I would call a new wave of Palestinian theologians trying to wrestle with these questions of repairing the relationships that get broken because of colonialism, relationships to one another, relationships to God, and relationships to the land. So that's sort of in a nutshell the book, but I'm also engaged in trying to create a movement here of Palestinians and Israelis who want to see a different reality.
Thank you. So if you are a person who pays attention to all the names that were published in the promotional materials, you'll notice that it's Julie, John, and I who are here. We had another panelist, Dr. Emlyn Ott, who was unable to join us, but Emlyn and I share some similarities of context to what John described of living in communities that are about half Jewish. And I'm going to steal a little bit of Emlyn's story here, because when we were debriefing, she was sharing that the experience, which was also her first experience in Palestine and Israel, has changed the way she interacts with her Jewish friends and neighbors. And it has given her more courage to speak about the realities that we witnessed. And I've shared some of this experience, but it has also been the case that when I've traveled to Israel a number of times now. This was my 4th trip. I lead a class called Living in Hope that looks at the complexities in Israel and Palestine. And when I go across the street to my neighbor's house, I'm sitting in a living room with primarily elderly Jewish women who are eager to learn about what's happening in Israel. The focus for them is on security and safety, and they're always so concerned about how dangerous this is, that I've gone there. But when I start to share my experience, their response is overwhelmingly sadness, disgust with the Israeli government, and a desire to figure out what to do, and actual paralysis about how to take any kind of action or bring about any change. And it's really hard to move forward when one is paralyzed, because the focus is on this view that the only way to be safe is to isolate oneself from the Palestinian people. John, can you share anything about dynamics like that in Israel?
So I think from living in Jerusalem, a lot, and from growing up in an Israeli Jewish school, I managed to learn a lot about sort of the Israeli Jewish narrative and identity, and part of that is also learning about the Holocaust, the Shoah, and I would meet with Holocaust survivors every year because they would bring them to the school to tell their stories. So I very much received that type of education, and I can perhaps understand it slightly better than some of my other Palestinian brothers and sisters. But I think here this need for security and desire for being free and not being persecuted is one that I think many people share, Jewish people and non-Jews, and this is something I support, of course, the security of people. But I think what people tend to mix is this sort of deep desire and need to feel secure, and then mixing it with a settler colonial movement which seeks to dominate land and people. So again, if to help it maybe for North American audiences, I'm sure some of the European settlers in North America wanted to feel, practice their own religious identity and narrative and wanted to feel free and safe. But it's another thing when they sought to dominate and basically get rid of an entire population. So I think we need to differentiate between sort of Judaism and Jews and the political Zionist movement. So when we realize actually that also Palestinians have these deep needs for feeling secure and free, and we understand that this is something we should secure for all people, we can go beyond unhealthy political movements that seek to dominate the land and people.
Thank you. One of the projects that you and your brothers are engaged in is creating a newer approach to liberation theology. And I was really captivated by Audre Lorde's quote of "You can't dismantle the master's home using the master's tools." And it struck me that that's what you're going about is creating some new tools to try to dismantle systems of oppression. And I'm wondering if you can share with us a little bit of what you've drawn from the old tools. They aren't, absolutely useless, but where you think they fall short, and what are the new tools that you're creating?
Yeah, so I think it's the Caribbean thinker Gordon Lewis that he says you can't dismantle the master's homes with the master's tools, but you need to take the tools, create new tools, and then build alternative houses. And in that sense, create a complete different alternative. So that is something that I'm trying to do. I don't know how successful I am in it, but I'm at least trying. Because, and this is also thanks to my Palestinian theological elders that have paved the way for me and many other Palestinian Christians in understanding who we are and facing with some of our deep crises. So there's a very important theologian, Auntie Cedar Davis, who's now in her 90s, who also wrote the foreword to the book, who spoke about the faith Nakba, not just the Nakba of being displaced from one's home, the catastrophe, the ethnic cleansing of Palestinians, but the faith Nakba, this deep crisis of faith of how can it be that our own Bible and faith is used to promote violence against us. So thanks to theologians like Auntie Cedar and other theologians as well, they've given us already a framework for understanding who we are and how unhelpful theologies like Christian Zionism are, or colonial theologies, or imperial theologies, right? So in the book, we speak about soap makers, right? That academic theologians are like soap makers. And we are still within the tradition of soap making, but we're trying to also, experiment with new recipes. So in that sense, we're trying to do something different. And the way we are doing, I think, the theology differently is, one could say, in three different ways. The first one is we're not trying to target white Christians in the West to see us Palestinians as humans. That's not what we're trying to do. A lot of our books are doing that, and it's very important, those books. But what we're doing is not trying to convince someone who's a Christian Zionist to see me as a human. I'm not interested in that as much. What I'm interested in the book and this new wave of Palestinian theologians is speaking to the movement that is seeking to liberate Palestine in a way that's just and one that is in the spirit of reconciliation and equality for all people, Jews, Muslims, and Christians. So the audience is completely different. We're addressing the movement. And therefore, the second thing that we're doing is we're appealing to different already existing solidarity movements. So we have a book in the chapter engaging with the genocide in Guatemala, and then bringing it into conversation with the genocide here in Palestine. Or there's another chapter in the book engaging with indigenous theology in Turtle Island, right? And bringing it into conversation here. Or Black theology and Palestinian theology, right? So we're trying to create larger movements of solidarity, opening it up between communities who are oppressed and those in solidarity with the oppressed. And the third point, and this might be very important for those really interested in theology, and that is that we're looking for different sources of theology. That is to say that usually when you try to write something theological, you go into books, academic books, and you draw, from some wise academics. But here we're looking at theology in a variety of different sources. So when you think about your own life, some of the most influential people that have formed who you are theologically have been your grandparents. So we have a chapter in the book written by a great contributor who looks at grandma theology. And his grandmothers are from Gaza, and he looks and draws a lot of wisdom from them. Because in times of great suffering and genocide, it's not the theology in books that necessarily empower you and keep you resilient. It's the theology that you learned over the dinner table. So that we're trying to decolonize the way we understand theology and where we seek for knowledge when we are building theology.
Thank you. Julie.
One of the things that I'm noticing, John, and I'd love to hear you and Eileen share with me about this, there are ways in which my experience of visiting Palestine was deeply personal. And so I was seeing places I've been reading about in theology and in church history, in scripture and elsewhere. And it just had a very deeply personal, profound connection for me in terms of being able to relate to the faith that I hold and claim. And then there's the challenge of being able to fully embrace and live that, and to be able to understand what happens over time as the stories keep getting told and retold and morphed and nuanced. And what I was recognizing, one of the things I learned with studying human communications was how innovations change over time, that it takes time sometimes for things to have generational shifts. And what I've noticed is that when I did my Master's of Divinity, Nadac was the one who was the first writer of Palestinian liberation theology, and the idea of a Palestinian Christian theology of liberation was so much a part of what I was learning and growing and putting in conversation with those things. But this kind of institutional shift that was happening, it seems that, well, let me do a side note. When the elevator was invented, people had been used to carrying heavy sacks up 3 or 4 or 5 flights, and you never would build a building any taller than that because you just couldn't humanly do it. When the elevator was built, they found an easier way to get up the 3 or 4 or 5 flights, but they didn't really think about skyscrapers. They were just solving a practical problem. What happened with the next generation that grew up knowing how to go up 5 flights was a creative imagination that allowed for a thinking way outside the box, that allowed for skyscrapers to be imagined. And in that process of having the foundation from that first generation, they were able to look differently, experience the same thing, but in a very radically different way, and imagine a whole lot of other things that couldn't have been conceived by the folks that started it. And it seemed to me in reading your book that that's a part of what I was experiencing, the kind of contextualization, the kind of localization, the kind of conversation between what's happening to me personally and what's happening to us as a whole was a big part of some of the generational shifts in thinking about an indigenous Palestinian liberation theology, which has the foundings of what I learned in the 80s and 90s, but it's radically different. And I'd love to hear how you see that generational shift.
Yeah, so we really, the cross on the olive tree wants to mimic the olive harvest. So you gave that a helpful example of the elevator. We wanted to bring the metaphor and the idea and the concept of the olive harvest. When we go to the olive harvest, we go with our nephews, we go with our grandparents, we go with our extended family. This is a communal effort. And therefore, the book project is 8 different contributors. We didn't want to do it alone. We want to do it in community. Theology in its most powerful forms is done in community. And therefore, we also don't want to completely disregard the importance of our theological elders who were facing their own challenges, and they were working within their own contexts. And thanks to them, I am who I am, and I'm able to, answer or try to answer different questions or ask different questions. So we really wanted to do it within continuation, and that's why we asked from Reverend Naim and Auntie Cedar to write the foreword, but also we met with them and the contributors to bless this journey. We wanted to do it together. And at the end of the day, what we try to say is that the olive groves are the context in which someone does theology. The farmer is the theologian, and the olive oil is the theology itself. And therefore, not only are we trying to do it intergenerational, we're trying to widen the definition of who a theologian is so we can include our grandmothers in the conversation, and we can include those who don't have academic degrees or have been trained in the church, but have deep wisdom in theology and relationship to land and relationship to God and to each other. So that's sort of the spirit in which we've tried to at least write this book. And it's also thanks to the other 6 contributors together with me and Sam. We're 8 that were so amazing and really embodied that spirit.
Thank you. While we were with our delegation, we spent a lot of time talking about colonialism and empire. I mean, those are 2 of the continually recurrent themes when we look at Palestine, but also when we look at all of these different pieces of the movement. And the main tool of colonialism and empire is dividing people. It seems like your approach is to remedy that so that we can restore those human connections and build strength for a shared movement. How do you see us, if we can build those connections, recognizing the uniqueness of each different movement, how do you see us gaining traction to bring about meaningful change in the face of empire?
Yeah, the empire and colonialism tries to distort relationship between neighbors, the relationship between human and land, and the relationship between human and God, right? And when it's all of these relationships are distorted, that's when the empire can really thrive and achieve its goal. So if I can again connect it to the generational perhaps difference to a certain extent academically in Palestinian theology, a lot of the emphasis has been on critiquing that, right? Pointing out how that's a problem. And I think that's really important. What we're trying to do is to work on restoring those relationships. How do we restore our relationship to the land? How do we restore our relationship to one another? And how do we restore our relationship to God? So in that sense, if you can restore your relationship to the land, that is a form of essentially anti-empire work. So you don't have to be some fancy theologian with a lot of degrees. Anything that would restore a relationship of people to land, and people to God and their spirituality, you are doing anti-imperial work. So it's not rocket science. This is things that are deeply embedded in our cultures, in our stories of our families, and this is the type of work that we're trying to emphasize, because it's easy to critique and it's hard to build. And I think this is true for many movements. And speaking again to a North American context, there's lots of movements that are very easily critiquing perhaps Trump and his movement, but are very weak at building that alternative. So how do we build communities that embody that restorative relationship to those areas that I mentioned? And I think if we can do that, we can be far more successful, because we'll be creating alternatives that meet people's real urgent grievances and needs that oftentimes they don't feel that are met in sort of, if I can call it, progressive or liberal circles. It's moving beyond the critique to the building.
Yeah. Say what I'm hearing there, particularly as we are moving rapidly into Advent, is a deeply incarnational theology that requires us to acknowledge our connections with each other, with the land, and with all of creation, so that we can build something. And also to not give into the temptation to focus exclusively on what's wrong, but to build from what's right. Because people like to complain. We really do. But when we focus just on complaining, we can't build something productive. What you're doing is finding what's positive in the face of overwhelming negativity and using that to ground what can become. Oh, we've got to.
There's a question that's here in the chat, looking at the question about, is the liberation theology you're advocating for being received by Palestinian Muslims and Jewish allies? And I was struck by your brother Daniel's recognition in the story of Exodus, how there was a mixed group that was a part of the process. For whatever reason, I've never recognized that phrase before. And it just stood out so powerfully, having been in Jerusalem, having seen the different relationships, some were smooth and some not so smooth, between the different communities that are represented. How does this kind of liberation theology help all people to find a way of hope, to be able to move forward toward that dream of God that God's offered us?
Exactly. So we say in Palestine that oftentimes the word peace or reconciliation is a dirty word, because it has been used against us in so many different ways to further colonize our lands and ourselves. So, there'd be all of these peace and reconciliation initiatives that at the end of the day would further the imbalance of power, would further the oppression and occupation. So in that specific chapter, Daniel looks at how we need to decolonize those terms, but also and include sort of justice and liberation within the relationship with reconciliation. But at the same time, liberation can also be an idol, because what you want to do is, in a system of an oppressor and oppressed, liberation is not reversing those roles. That would further, again, injustices and oppression. So what the real goal is not liberation, it's redemption. It's this sort of radical love of transforming the entire relationship between these dynamics of an oppressed and oppressor, so that me as a Palestinian, my identity is no longer connected to victimhood, and an Israeli is not seen as a settler, right? So we are trying to transform the relationships as a whole. And that is the real goal. And if that is the real goal, our movements need to be able to be wide enough to include those either Israeli Jews or Zionists, even abroad, to get rid of their unhealthy identity and be part of a new movement that is seeking to completely change the reality here. And that's not easy. And Daniel uses that sort of picture from Exodus of some of the midwives, the Egyptians' midwives, supporting and helping in their own way the Hebrews, or some Egyptian giving gold and silver to the Hebrews who are leaving. But also, if you think about the Jesus movement, he had Matthew the tax collector, who is seen essentially as a collaborator, one who's working with the empire and benefiting from it on the oppression of his own people. And he has Simon the Zealot, who is essentially a freedom fighter. And he manages to build a movement that holds both. So how can we hold movements that do challenge people, but also allow for that transformative and radical love?
So I know personally, as I'm feeling in the midst of a lot of different perspectives, particularly around politics in the United States, but we don't want to go into depth about that. But the thing I want to raise is how I experienced a sense of hopefulness, and you named it as you don't take yourself as a victim. There is a way in which that recognition of being God's beloved seems to be carrying people in a different way of responding to the oppression than a lot of times oppressed people react when they're in situations where power is dominating. And how do we help each other to hold that? I guess is the question I'm leading up to. How do I continue to stay hopeful in my context? How do you stay hopeful in your context? What is it that fuels that passion to keep knowing that there is more that we can have, that we can keep working toward and make it real?
I think something that's really helpful as a sort of personal practical tool is to constantly remind myself that I'm in life both an oppressor and an oppressed in different contexts and in different relationships. That is to say, if I'm now speaking with an Israeli next to me, in those dynamics, I am an oppressed person. I don't have the same rights. I get treated differently by the army or the police or you name it. At the same time, I'm also a male within a Palestinian, very patriarchal society, and therefore it places me in structures that oppress my sisters. I also come from a middle-class family, so I also can participate in economic structures that are deeply unhelpful and deeply harmful for other groups of people, whether it be in Palestine or around the world. And in many ways, I can oppress the land itself if I continue in unhealthy practices. So when we realize that we're actually both an oppressed and an oppressor in different relationships, it sort of keeps you a bit grounded in life and in reality, and also allows you to think about how you can transform all of those relationships as a whole. But in this deep time of crisis and in the genocide, where we've seen more than 67 people at least being killed, we've seen children starve to death, we've seen complete families disappear by these huge bombs fall on Earth. I don't want to embrace this sort of optimistic, cheap hope that is oftentimes very prevalent in the West and amongst Christians in the West who kind of want to find something to cling on to. And what the book actually engages and invites people to do is to focus on a very indigenous Palestinian Christian ceremony, which focuses on Holy Saturday. Sometimes people really want to jump from Friday to Sunday, from crucifixion to resurrection, from death to life. And what we're saying to people is we invite you to join us in Holy Saturday, because this is sort of a great place of tension that really describes trauma. Saturday is a day of trauma. It's after crucifixion, and you don't know if resurrection is coming. And we look to Mary Magdalene as the figure there to actually follow, because all the male disciples disappear. But her true commitment and love and solidarity to Jesus is one that we see sort of the right way of engaging with this type of hope that is deeply actually connected to solidarity with the oppressed, even when they're dead, right? And to great and radical love.
Yeah. Living in Holy Saturday is really hard.
Mm-hmm.
That's when the tabernacle is wide open and you can see it's empty. Ciborium's upside down on the altar, and you're really wondering if Jesus is gonna come back. There's a lot of discomfort there. Hunter has asked, he's outlined your some principles you have, but then how do you see your Palestinian methodology? And I'm going to ask you to incorporate this resting in the tension and discomfort in relation to the theology it's created.
Yeah, I think it kind of in the book we speak about the theology of the olive oil of the lamp. This idea that it's the theology that are in people's homes, it's accessible, it's the theology of our grandmothers, it's the theology in our culture, in our food, in our language. So how can we, when we think about the methodology of theology, or basically how does one do theology, we should not always think about how I individually write theology and with what tools do I do it, but with the question should be asked is with who am I doing theology, in relations to who? And I think the minute you kind of ask those questions, you're doing it in community, you're doing it for the community, and you're doing it to liberate, right, the community and to answer questions of our own people. And this is sort of at the heart of what this new wave is trying to do, is not to appease Christians, in the West, who have been some of the main partners for Palestinian theology, but for the movement itself. And that's kind of the shift that we're trying to do in its methodological but embodied form.
You mentioned home. Last week I was in Phoenix, Arizona, and I had the opportunity to go to the Heard Museum, which, if anyone hasn't been there, it's an amazing exhibition of stories of the indigenous Native Americans in the Arizona, Mexico area. And the image that struck me, they have this whole exhibit called Home, but the entrance has two pictures side by side. And one is a map of the United States, and the color code says that this color means it's populated by Native American peoples. And another one that said what was other territories. And then beside it, there's a current map that basically is a white background map of the United States with very small dots and pockets in different places that shows the homes of the Native American peoples now. For me, that brings a great deal of tension, knowing that not only as colonizers did my ancestors take the land, but we've really severely limited people into small pockets that aren't in their home places, that don't have the land that the bones of their ancestors are buried in, that don't have the stories embedded in the trees and the surrounding areas. They've had to transpose their understanding of home and start making new stories because of the kind of experience that they had. And I put that in contrast with my recollections of walking around in Jerusalem and seeing the houses that were being demolished so that a park could be created with Christian themes. And the tension in my heart, the sense of the loss of home, how can we reclaim a sense of helping to create spaces of home where the olive oil can be shared, where the table can be filled, where the stories can have a mixed community around them? What are the things that I need to do as someone that's wanting to be an ally, but I'm not Indigenous, I'm not Native American, I'm not Palestine? How can we help to support the movement that we care about in this kind of a setting? How do we make home?
Yeah, I'll connect this to another conversation. There was someone who, was insisting when I was in the US about 3 weeks ago, was insisting on me speaking to a bunch of Christians. She was basically saying to me, John, you need to speak to these American Christian Zionists, and you just need to tell them how actually the Bible speaks about justice and peace. As if only I showed them these few verses about justice and peace, they will completely change. No, the change is far more needed in its sort of essence, or its fundamental identity of what it means to be an American. If I can say it that way, and that actually the most productive thing I could do is not necessarily take them to a hermeneutical conversation and discussion, but actually connect them to the land in their own context, or for them to kind of connect to their neighbors, and so on and so forth. And that behavioral change would, I think, then bring the more theological change, because we have to remember that theology is a second act. It's first our praxis, our experience, and then theology is the reflection of that, and not the other way around. So that's sort of one thing. But I think for those who are white and Christian and from North America, I think a lot of the work is the work that you need to do. I don't have all the answers for it, but I know that you need to work on your own identity and see how you can actually participate and be a fellow sort of Mary Magdalene to the bodies around you, right? And to the injustices around you. And I think when we can, there is redemption there for those who have identities and come from backgrounds of people who are oppressive. And again, all of us are also oppressive in different relationships. So we all have to do this work. It's not like Palestinians don't have to do that work. There's plenty of ways where as I mentioned, as a man or someone from middle class can be oppressive to other people. So we all have to do this type of work.
Yes, we do. And Julie was talking about at the Heard Museum, which is a museum. When we go to Israel and Palestine, it's so easy to view the holy sites as museums and lose sight of the reality that these are in fact people's homes, that what we as Western Christians know as Holy Sepulchre is the Church of the Resurrection. And I love that contrast, and that it has multiple active worshiping communities. How do you have any thoughts on how we can help people remember that these aren't just historical sites in our own land, in your homeland, when we go back to Europe and see places, that these are living, breathing homes for real people?
Yeah, I think like you did. I mean, you came and you saw, and you did, I think, more of an ethical pilgrimage. There's ways where pilgrimages can be harmful to people. Tourism can be very harmful to people. So how do we practice ethical traveling? And I think one way is to bring people to Palestine and to meet them with what we call the living stones and not just the ancient stones. But also Palestinian Christians are sometimes puzzled by people who are sort of vaccinated and have this sort of over obsession with the Church of Resurrection, because we say the church is empty. There's nobody there. What do you the whole point is leaving the church. And that's actually what happens also on Holy Saturday, is after the fire comes out in Holy Fire Ceremony. And for those of you who have no idea what I'm talking about, write in Google Holy Fire Ceremony in Jerusalem, and you'll see what I'm talking about. People take the fire outside the church. So it's getting out of our comfort zone, going out, meeting people. And I think some of the best things you can do in North America is go to those neighborhoods that people tell you that are too dangerous. Go to those neighborhoods where it's just people who are not white. Go and look at the industries that are killing people and the land. And some of the best ways you can do this is through food. We emphasize this also, I think, in the book, or maybe we don't, but maybe in some of our talks we have, is that some of the best and most important, powerful teaching moments of Jesus is around food. And it's amazing how that's a thread within the four gospels. It's like he breaks bread and then he has his teaching moment. I think it's the Gospel of Luke or John, I can't remember, but after the resurrection, the disciples are fishing and then they see a man and they can't recognize Jesus, but then when they see him cooking around the fire, they recognize it's Jesus. How food can be a powerful way for us to be with each other, to be with the land, and to be with God. And I think we need to eat with each other more. And I think we don't emphasize that enough. We now eat in front of screens. We should eat with people. And I know that sounds like such a simple and basic thing, but it can transform people entirely.
So we are coming close to the end of our time. Are there any final questions? John, I really want to thank you so much for taking the time to be with us, to sharing your work and inviting us into this ongoing project of building something new that will, we hope, create stronger movements to build solidarity. I'd also like to thank the Episcopal Parish Network for collaborating with us and invite people to join for the next one, which I believe is in December.
Chris Hokeltubby's reading the Bible from Turtle. I just got it.
From Turtle Island.
Reading the Bible on Turtle Island is the name of the book, and it'll be the focus for the December conversation.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.